The wind howled through the endless white. Snow danced sideways, sharp as tiny needles, and wrapped the world in silence. Eli Turner trudged on. He was a trapper, had been for 17 years, and this stretch of frozen forest was his home. A place where no roads reached, where winters could kill a man in his sleep, where the stars came down like silver nails at night, and the only voices were the crack of ice and the cry of wolves. Eli liked it that way. Out here, nothing lied to you. Not the wind, not the snow, not the loneliness. That day, his boots crunched over the hidden trail leading to his farthest trapline, a 2-day hike from his cabin. He was late. A storm had pinned him down for 3 days, and he worried something might have gotten into his traps. Maybe a fox, maybe worse. But halfway down the slope, something made him freeze. It was a sound, faint, broken like a dream, a mewing. Eli's brows knotted. Nothing mewed out here, not this far from anything alive. He listened again. There, to the north, a high-pitched cry cutting through the blizzard's hiss. It was soft but desperate, like something tiny. Begging, Eli's instincts screamed to ignore it. Storm's coming back. Could be a trick of the wind. Could be nothing. But something deeper, something old in his bones, whispered otherwise. He veered off trail. The sound grew clearer as he pushed through the drifts. Branches slapped at his face. Snow found its way down his collar. And then, he saw them. 9 tiny shapes huddled in a hollow beneath a fallen spruce. Kittens, lynx kittens. Eli stopped breathing. Their fur was soaked. Their paws trembled. Ears tipped with black tufts sagged like wet feathers. And their eyes, wide, glassy, unblinking, held a fear so sharp it cut straight through him. They weren't supposed to be alive. No mother anywhere. No tracks, no blood. No sign of how they got here. Just 9 living, breathing, shivering scraps of wildlife in the middle of nowhere, waiting for death. Eli crouched slowly, his heart slamming. They were so small, maybe 5 weeks old. They should still be nursing. One of them hissed weakly at him, though its body wobbled from the effort. Where's your mom, little ones? Eli whispered, his voice trembling. He hadn't spoken aloud in days. His words sounded like they didn't belong to him. The kittens pressed closer together, eyes following him, not blinking. They were dying. He could see it in their stillness. Wild babies this young didn't stay still unless something was terribly wrong. Eli's breath came in clouds. He knew what he should do, walk away. Nature was cruel. It was always cruel. And stepping in meant risking everything. If they survived the night, they'd imprint on him. Think he was their parent, raise wild animals wrong, and they could never go back. And yet, he couldn't move. His chest ached like something inside was tearing loose. Once, years ago before this exile, he'd held his own baby girl in a hospital room, tiny, fragile. He'd whispered her name through tears. That had been the last time he'd cried, until now. Damn it, he whispered, voice cracking. He took off his heavy coat and gently scooped the kittens inside. They didn't fight, didn't resist, just pressed closer, a soft warmth blooming through the fabric. As he stood, the world around him blurred. The storm swallowed the trail behind him, erasing his path, and the forest roared like an endless mouth. Eli tightened his arms around them. Hold on, he murmured. Just hold on. And then he turned back toward his cabin. 9 fragile lives beating against his chest like tiny second hearts, knowing this would change everything. By the time Eli stumbled through his cabin door, the sky was black, and the world had vanished behind a wall of snow. He kicked the door shut with his heel and collapsed to his knees. Coat still clutched around the bundle pressed to his chest. 9 trembling kittens slid gently onto the fur rug by the hearth. The cabin smelled of pine smoke and old leather. Its only light flickered from the wood stove, painting the room in trembling gold. For a long moment, Eli just knelt there, gasping, while the storm screamed against the walls like something furious at being locked out. Then he moved. He stripped off his soaked gear, tossed it aside, and crawled to the stove. He opened it, coaxed the flames higher, fed it more wood until it roared. The kittens huddled together in a loose knot, eyes half closed, breaths shallow. Their tiny ribs showed through their fur. A few shivered so hard their teeth chattered. Not on my watch, Eli muttered. He filled a pot with snow, set it to melt, dug out the emergency powdered milk he'd once bought on a whim. back when he'd imagined maybe raising goats out here. He had never opened it. Until now, he found an old dropper in a first aid kit, sterilized it with boiling water, and then began, one by one, he cradled them in his calloused hands and coaxed warm milk between their lips. At first they resisted, weakly pawing at the dropper. Then hunger took over and they drank. Eli's heart twisted. They were so light, so impossibly delicate, like holding handfuls of warm breath. He worked for hours, rotating them near the fire, rubbing their paws, drying their fur, feeding them until they sagged in drowsy exhaustion. One little female, smaller than the rest, refused to swallow at first. He nearly panicked, kept rubbing her throat gently, whispering to her until finally she latched on, her tiny tongue flicking the dropper tip like a flame. "You're fighters," he said softly, "every last one of you." When they finally slept, curled like commas around each other, Eli leaned back against the log wall, staring. He should feel relief. Instead, fear gnawed at him. They'd need feeding every few hours, around the clock. They had no mother to teach them how to hunt, climb, survive. If they grew too tame, they'd never make it in the wild. If he left them, they'd die. If he kept them, they might die anyway. He rubbed his face. This wasn't part of the plan. His life was quiet, ordered, controlled. Just him and the silence. Now the silence was gone. Now there were 9 heartbeats filling his cabin like tiny drum beats. The storm howled harder outside, snow rattling against the windows like bones. Eli wrapped himself in a blanket on the floor near them, exhaustion finally dragging him under. But before he slept, he whispered to the darkness, "I don't know how, but I'm not losing you." And somewhere in the firelight, the smallest kitten stirred, pressing closer to her siblings, a flicker of life still burning inside her, as if she had heard him. Eli woke to silence. The storm was gone. Outside, the world had become a vast, untouched white plain. The trees stood frozen in place, their branches wearing heavy coats of ice. For a few precious seconds, he forgot what had happened. Forgot the chaos, the fear, the impossible choice. Then he felt it, the warmth near his side. The weight of tiny bodies pressed together. The kittens, all 9 of them, were alive. Eli blinked at them, heart pounding. They looked different now. Less like dying ghosts, more like small pieces of sunlight wrapped in fur. Their ears stood upright again. Their little paws twitched in sleep. One was snoring, a soft whistling sound that made Eli's throat tighten. He didn't want to move. He wanted to stay here, suspended in this strange new quiet, and just listen to their breathing. But the sun was rising, and with it came reality. He had to feed them again. He sat up slowly, every muscle stiff. His blanket slid off his shoulders, and cold air kissed his skin. The kittens stirred, mewing softly, and Eli's lips curved without him meaning to. He hadn't smiled in months, maybe years. "Morning," he whispered. One brave little male, with bright golden eyes, tottered toward him and bumped into his knee. His tail stuck straight up like a tiny bottle brush. Eli scooped him up gently. The kitten blinked, yawned, and pressed his damp nose to Eli's thumb. Something fragile cracked open inside him. He fed them one by one again, his big hands trembling around their fragile bodies. The smallest female still needed coaxing, but she drank a little more this time. When she finished, she gave a tired little squeak and fell asleep curled in Eli's palm. He kept staring at her long after she closed her eyes. She was no bigger than the heart inside his chest. "You're going to make it," he whispered. "All of you are." He spent the day doing what he hadn't done in years, building for someone other than himself. He fashioned a makeshift nest from an old wooden crate, lined it with the warmest furs he had. He set it close to the wood stove, but not too close. He sealed the cabin's cracks with cloth to keep drafts out. He rearranged everything, turning his solitary trapper's cabin into something almost like a nursery. It was strange. The silence he used to love now felt wrong. The cabin buzzed with tiny sounds, squeaks, purrs, scratching claws. It was chaos, but it made the place feel alive again. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about his own survival. He was thinking about theirs. By evening, the kittens were exploring. Their wobbly legs carried them across the rug like furry little explorers. They climbed over each other, pounced on Eli's boots, chewed on the laces. One tried to crawl up his pant leg and got halfway before tumbling backward with a squeal. Eli laughed out loud. The sound startled him. It startled the kittens too. They froze, then all turned their bright eyes toward him like 9 tiny judges. "Yeah," he chuckled. "Guess I don't laugh much." Something flickered through him, a shadow of memory. Once, long ago, he had laughed like this every day. In a small house with warm yellow walls, with someone who loved him, with a baby girl who giggled when he made silly faces. Then came the accident, the grief, the silence. He had come out here to escape that silence, but maybe he had just been drowning in it all along. He rubbed his face, breath shaking, and looked at the kittens again. 9 lives that had no reason to survive. 9 wild hearts that had chosen to trust him. "I'll keep you safe," he whispered. "I swear it." Outside, the night fell like black glass over the snow. Inside, 9 tiny hearts beat against the darkness. And for the first time in years, Eli's cabin wasn't just a shelter. It was a home. The third night came like teeth. Wind screamed down from the mountains, rattling the cabin walls so hard that snow sifted in through the seams. The temperature plunged. The fire fought to keep up. Eli paced like a caged wolf. The kittens were curled in their crate, but they weren't sleeping peacefully. They kept shivering, huddling so close their fur tangled together. Every so often one would squeak in distress. They were too young for cold like this. If they chilled, they'd fade fast. He knew it. He dragged every blanket he owned to the hearth, stoked the fire until it roared so bright it hurt to look at. But the wind just roared louder, like the whole forest was trying to break down his door. Eli grabbed his thickest coat and scooped the kittens inside against his bare chest, pressing them to his skin for warmth. He sat cross-legged right in front of the fire, rocking gently, whispering whatever words came to him. "You're all right. Just a storm. Just hold on, little ones." Their tiny claws pricked through the fabric as they pressed closer, seeking his heartbeat. He could feel their trembling ease little by little, could feel their warmth returning, could feel something inside himself unclenching with every soft breath against his ribs. But hours passed, and the storm only grew worse. At some point he realized he was crying. Tears ran hot down his cheeks. He didn't even know why. Maybe because he could feel how close death still was. Maybe because he could feel how alive they were. Maybe because he hadn't held anyone this close in years. He pressed his face to the crown of the smallest female's head and whispered, "I won't let you die. Do you hear me? Not you. Not any of you." The fire popped like gunfire. The walls shuddered. But slowly, the kittens stopped shaking. They breathed in sync, 9 tiny chests rising and falling with his. They made it through the night. Morning came like the first breath after drowning. The world outside had disappeared under drifts taller than Eli's shoulders. The forest was buried. The trail to his traps was gone. The storm had erased everything but this cabin and its beating hearts. Eli was exhausted, hollow-eyed, starving, but smiling. The kittens tumbled across the rug like they'd been born again. They chased shadows, climbed the legs of his chair, pounced on each other's tails. One climbed up his back and perched on his shoulder like a tiny lynx king, staring out at the white void beyond the window, as if daring it to try again. Eli laughed until his stomach hurt, but when the laughter faded, silence returned. And with it, a thought that chilled him worse than the storm. They were growing stronger, they were bonding with him, and if they stayed, they might never be wild again. He stared out at the endless snow, heart twisting. He had saved their lives. But if he wasn't careful, he could also ruin them. And yet, as the smallest female curled into the hollow of his palm and purred, actually purred, a soft rattling sound like distant thunder, Eli knew something he couldn't unknow. He couldn't let them go. Not yet. Not until he was sure they had a chance, maybe not even then. He whispered, "We'll figure it out. Together." 9 pairs of eyes blinked up at him like tiny embers, and for the first time since he had lost everything, Eli Turner didn't feel like the last soul left in the world. The days grew longer. The sun climbed higher over the snowy ridges, turning the frozen forest into a blinding ocean of light. And inside the cabin, 9 small hearts grew fierce, Eli could feel it happening. Each morning the kittens woke before him, stretching, yawning, their paws flexing like tiny claws of sunlight. They were heavier now, stronger. Their fur had fluffed into soft silver clouds, their ears sharp-tipped and always twitching. And their eyes burned brighter every day. Wild gold, wild green, wild blue. The colors of something ancient waking up. They weren't helpless anymore. One morning Eli found them perched on the windowsill, watching the world outside like soldiers planning an escape. Their tails flicked, bodies coiled with energy. When the wind moved the branches, they all crouched in unison and pounced at the glass. The cabin shook with tiny thuds and squeaks of frustration. Eli laughed. "So, you want to hunt, huh?" They turned their heads to look at him. 9 pairs of eyes glowing like lit lanterns. Eli crouched, meeting their gaze. "Someday," he said softly. "Someday you will," but the words twisted in his chest like a knife, because someday meant letting them go, and he wasn't sure he could. They began practicing on everything: shoelaces, pine cones, his socks. One day he caught 2 of them stalking the broom as if it were a deer. Another time he woke to find 3 kittens clinging to the curtains, eyes blazing with triumph, while the fabric tore down around them like a dying flag. The cabin turned into chaos. Fur in his food, claw marks on his table. Nothing safe, nothing quiet, and Eli loved it. The silence that had once been his shield now felt like a grave. These little wildlings had filled every corner with life again. But the stronger they grew, the more restless they became. At night they howled, tiny, high-pitched cries that echoed off the cabin walls and clawed into his heart. Sometimes they would all race in circles at top speed until collapsing in a tangled heap of fur and paws. Panting like miniature lions after a kill, they were practicing for a world that wasn't this cabin. They were practicing for freedom. That thought kept Eli awake. He sat by the fire while they slept, rubbing the scarred palms of his hands, thinking about what freedom would mean. It meant letting them out there, into the cold, the predators, the hunger. Into a world that had already killed their mother and tried to kill them. They would not survive without knowing how to hunt. They could not learn that here with him. If he waited too long, they would forget what they were. They would grow tame, and then the wild would eat them alive. Eli stared into the flames, his chest heavy. He thought of his daughter, the one he had lost before she could learn to walk. He thought of how he had held her so gently, terrified she might break. How he had tried to keep her safe, and how it hadn't mattered. And now here he was, holding fragile lives again, and terrified all over. The smallest female, the one who had almost died that first night, stirred in her sleep and climbed clumsily into his lap. She was still smaller than the others, but her spirit was huge. She looked at him now with the calm confidence of something that had stared down death and chosen to live. Eli stroked her head gently. "Little warrior," he whispered, "you're going to lead them someday." Her eyes blinked slowly like moonlight through leaves, and Eli knew, whether he liked it or not, these kittens were wild. And wild things do not stay still. He wasn't ready, not yet. Not tonight. Tonight they were his family. The thaw came slowly, like the world waking from a long fever. Snow melted in streams off the cabin roof. The first green buds pushed through the frostbitten ground. Ravens returned, their black wings slashing across the pale sky. And Eli knew the forest was waking up. Which meant danger was waking up too. The kittens were unstoppable now. They raced from wall to wall, leapt from chair to table, clawed up the log beams and yowled down from the rafters like tiny kings of the world. They pounced on his boots the second he moved. They wrestled each other with miniature growls, all teeth and fluff and fury. Eli had to clear half his cabin just so they had space to burn their energy. He started taking them outside, only for short moments. The first time they froze, eyes huge, noses twitching at the sharp bite of real air. Then one stepped forward, then another, and suddenly they were bounding through the snow, leaving tiny crisscrossing trails like silver lightning. Eli followed with his heart in his throat. They didn't go far. Not yet. But every day they ranged a little wider. Every day they looked back at him a little less often. And every day, Eli felt the clock ticking louder. That was when he saw the tracks, wolf tracks, huge, fresh, just beyond the tree line. Eli knelt in the snow, his pulse hammering. The prints were deep, sharp, only an hour old at most. A big male alone, or scouting for a pack. He straightened slowly, scanning the silent trees. Nothing moved. No sound, no birds. That was worse than seeing something. The kittens tumbled around his boots, oblivious. One batted his shoelace. Another pounced on a drifting snowflake, chirping in delight. Eli's chest clenched. They had no fear yet. No understanding of death. And death was watching. He herded them back inside quickly, shutting the door and barring it. The cabin felt smaller than ever. Like the wolves were closing in. The forest had always been his ally. Now it felt like an enemy, because now he had something to lose. All night he sat by the window, rifle across his knees, eyes on the black tree line. He saw nothing, but he felt eyes. The forest was full of them, waiting, patient. The kittens finally curled up in their crate, worn out from their snowy adventure. They slept like they trusted the world. Eli envied them and feared for them. He knew what had to come next. If they were going to survive out there, they had to learn fear. They had to learn caution. They had to become what they were born to be, wild hunters, not housebound orphans, and teaching them that might mean breaking their trust in him. That thought hurt worse than the cold. He watched them sleep, his jaw tight, his throat aching. 9 lives he had pulled back from the edge. 9 souls who thought he was safety itself. Maybe I'm not, he whispered to the dark. Maybe I'm just a cage. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a warning, and in that moment Eli knew something was coming. Something big, something that would either set them free or destroy everything. It began with silence. The kind of silence that feels like a scream holding its breath. Eli was splitting firewood just outside the cabin, the kittens tumbling around the doorway like a pack of silver ghosts. The spring sun had gone soft and golden, melting the last snow into glittering streams. It felt almost safe, too safe. That's when the birds stopped singing. Every feathered voice in the forest cut off at once. The only sound left was water dripping from the eaves, and the kittens' soft chirps as they played. Eli froze, axe in hand. He knew that kind of silence. It meant something big was near, something that made even the wind hold still. Slowly he scanned the tree line, then he saw it. 2 yellow eyes, low to the ground, glowing between the black pines. A wolf, huge, male, alone, or scouting. Its fur was ragged from winter, shoulders thick as stone, ribs moving like dark shadows beneath its coat. It stepped out into the sunlight with a predator's silence, snow crunching softly under its paws. The kittens hadn't noticed yet. They were too busy chasing a beetle across the muddy ground, squeaking with excitement. Eli's blood turned to ice. He didn't move, didn't breathe. His mind raced like a trapped animal. If he ran, the wolf would chase. If he shouted, it might spook or attack. The rifle was inside the cabin. 10 steps away. 10 steps too many, and the kittens, 9 fragile hearts, scattered across the ground like easy prey. The wolf took another step closer. Eyes locked on the smallest kitten. Eli's body moved before his mind caught up. He dropped the axe, stepped between the wolf and the kittens, arms spread wide, voice exploding from his throat. "Hey!" The forest shattered. The kittens bolted toward the cabin in a flash of silver fur, their cries sharp and wild. The wolf flinched back, snarling, lips peeling to show yellow teeth. Steam poured from its jaws like smoke. Eli grabbed the iron poker leaning by the doorway and swung it with all his strength, smashing it against a tree trunk. The sound cracked like gunfire. "Go!" he roared. The wolf lunged, then veered off, circling sideways, eyes burning like coals. It wasn't afraid, just testing him, measuring him, deciding. Eli stood his ground, heart hammering like war drums, gripping the iron until his knuckles bled white. For a breathless eternity, nothing moved. Then the wolf made its choice. It melted back into the shadows, paused silent until only those eyes remained, watching, waiting. Then even the eyes were gone. Eli slammed the door shut and dropped the bar. His hands shook so hard he almost dropped the iron. The kittens huddled in their crate, fur puffed like dandelions, wide-eyed and trembling. One gave a high-pitched hiss, trying to be brave. The smallest female pressed her face into her sibling's, body quaking. Eli dropped to his knees beside them, chest heaving. "You're okay," he whispered, voice raw. "You're okay. I've got you." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. He didn't, not really. Not anymore. The forest had come knocking. Next time it wouldn't leave empty-pawed. That night the forest pressed close around the cabin like a living thing. Eli sat by the window with his rifle laid across his knees, eyes on the tree line. He could feel the wolf out there, gliding through the dark, silent as falling ash. It wasn't gone. It would come back. And next time he might not be fast enough. The kittens eventually curled into their crate and slept, their tiny chests rising and falling in soft rhythm. They trusted the world again already. Eli couldn't, because now he understood something with terrible clarity. This cabin wasn't protecting them anymore. It was trapping them. If they stayed much longer, they'd forget the wild, forget how to fear, forget how to survive, and the wild would not forgive that. Eli looked at them one by one, memorizing their faces. The golden-eyed male who always led the charge, the smallest female curled in a ball of quiet strength, the mischievous pair who never stopped wrestling even in their sleep. He felt something crack inside his chest. He had saved them. And now he had to let them go, not tonight. But soon, before the forest came for them again, he whispered to the darkness, voice breaking, "I'll teach you, and then you'll leave me." The fire popped softly in answer, and outside, somewhere beyond the trees, the wolf howled, long and low, like the voice of the wild itself. The next morning, Eli woke with a plan. It was the hardest decision he had ever made. Harder than walking away from the world, harder than burying his old life under snow. He was going to teach them to survive, so they could leave him. He began by opening the cabin door wide and stepping back. The kittens froze, blinking at the sudden flood of sunlight. The forest stretched before them, endless and alive, filled with the sharp scent of pine and meltwater. The world they were born for. One by one they padded outside. Their paws sank into the soft snow. Their ears twitched. Their eyes blazed. Then they ran. They leapt through the drifts like silver fire, chasing shadows, pouncing on invisible prey. Their bodies moved with a grace Eli had never seen, wild and effortless, like water becoming lightning. Eli watched from the doorway, pride and fear battling in his chest. This was what they were meant to be. Not his, never his. Training them was chaos. He started bringing them bits of meat and hiding it under brush so they would learn to track scent. He dragged feathers on strings through the snow, making them stalk low, silent, patient. He clapped loudly at random moments so they'd learn to vanish in an instant. At first they treated it like a game. Then instinct took over. Within days they were moving like ghosts. Silent, deadly, beautiful. Their paws left barely a whisper on the snow. Their eyes stayed fixed, unblinking, every muscle coiled like springs. Sometimes they practiced on each other, ambushing from the trees. The forest rang with tiny growls and squeals. One day, Eli watched the smallest female climb halfway up a spruce and leap down onto her brother's back like a falling star. She landed without a sound. He yelped and rolled over in surrender. Eli laughed out loud, then felt his throat close. They didn't need him anymore. Not the way they had, and that was the point. But the wolf was still out there. Some nights Eli saw its shape on the ridge, black against the moonlight, watching. Always watching, awaiting for weakness. Eli's fear hardened into something else, resolve. He would not lose them now. Not after coming this far. Weeks passed. The snow thinned. The forest came alive in waves of green, and the kittens, no, not kittens anymore, not really, became something wild and breathtaking. Their muscles rippled under sleek fur. Their eyes burned like sunlit amber. When they moved, the world seemed to pause and watch. But every night they still came back. They still curled around him by the fire, soft purrs filling the cabin. They still looked at him like he was their world, and that was what hurt most, because soon he wouldn't be. One quiet evening, Eli sat on the porch as the sunset bled gold through the trees. The lynx lounged around him, grooming each other, blinking slowly in the warm light. He reached down and stroked the smallest female between the ears. She lifted her head and met his gaze, unblinking. In her eyes he saw the forest, the sky. The wild calling her home. He swallowed hard. "You're ready," he whispered. "All of you." His voice cracked. She pressed her forehead to his thumb. Just once, a silent goodbye that shattered him like glass. Then she turned her gaze back to the woods, eyes burning, and Eli knew the moment was coming. The hardest moment of his life. He would have to open his hands and let them fly. The morning came cold and bright, the sky polished to silver. Eli stood on the porch, pack slung over his shoulder, staring out at the forest. 9 lynx crouched in the snow before him, silent as shadows, their breath steaming in the light. They weren't kittens anymore. They stood taller now, lean and powerful, muscles flowing beneath their silver-spotted fur. Their paws were broad and silent, their ears sharp-tipped and always twitching. Their eyes glowed with wild light, fierce and untamed, and every one of them was looking at him, waiting. They didn't know this was goodbye. Eli's throat burned. He had raised them from dying scraps of fur, nursed them through storms, taught them to hunt and hide and stalk. He had watched them change from helpless to unstoppable. They were pieces of his heart walking around on silent paws, and now he had to let them go. He crouched slowly, looking at each one in turn. "You're ready," he whispered. "You don't need me anymore." They blinked, tails flicking. The smallest female padded forward and pressed her nose to his boot, a soft, fleeting touch that nearly broke him. He had to move. If he hesitated, he'd never do it. "Come on," he said hoarsely and turned toward the deep forest. They followed. The walk was long. They crossed frozen streams that sang like glass, climbed ridges where the world stretched endless in every direction, passed through valleys rich with the scent of deer and pine. The lynx slipped between trees like silver ghosts, silent and perfect. Eli trailed behind, memorizing every step, every flick of their tails, every sound they made. Every step was a knife. Every step was love. By midday they reached a place he knew well, a hidden valley ringed by granite cliffs, thick with spruce and game. No roads came here, no humans, only the wild perfect. Eli stopped. The lynx stopped too, fanning out silently around him. The air buzzed with their energy. They could feel it, freedom just beyond his shadow. His hands shook. He dropped his pack and sank to his knees. "This is it," he whispered. "This is where you belong." They tilted their heads, eyes glowing. He pulled out the last thing he had carried all this way, a strip of dried meat. He tore it into 9 pieces and scattered it in the snow. They devoured it in seconds, lightning fast, teeth flashing. Then they looked up at him one last time. And the smallest female, the first one he had saved, the last to stop needing him, stepped closer. She looked into his eyes, steady and sure, and then she turned and walked away. The others followed. One by one they melted into the trees, silent as breath, until only flashes of silver fur remained. And then nothing. The forest closed behind them like a door, and Eli Turner was alone. He stood there for a long time, staring at the place where they had vanished, feeling like someone had cut the air from his lungs. His chest ached with pride and grief tangled together so tightly he couldn't tell them apart. They were gone, safe, wild, exactly as they were meant to be. And he had done it. His knees buckled. He sank into the snow, head in his hands, tears falling hot onto the frozen ground. Then, somewhere deep in the trees, a sound rose, a soft yowl, wild and bright, like the forest itself laughing. Eli lifted his head, and for the first time in years, he smiled. Eli didn't see them again for 3 days. He stayed in his cabin, silence wrapped around him like old cloth. The rooms felt hollow without the chaos of paws and squeaks. He kept glancing at the nest crate by the stove, now empty, cold, still holding strands of silver fur. It hurt, but it was a clean hurt. The kind that means something beautiful lived here once. Then on the 4th night, the wolf returned. It came in the dark, slipping through the trees like a shadow cut loose from the ground. Eli sensed it before he saw it, a pressure in the air, a coldness in his blood. He stepped onto the porch with his rifle, moonlight silvering the snow around him. Yellow eyes glowed at the edge of the clearing. The wolf was huge, leaner now, hungrier. Its breath rose in white plumes as it crept closer, silent as death. And then Eli heard another sound, soft, silent, surrounding him. Paws in the snow. He turned, shapes melted from the trees. 9 of them. Silver, silent, blazing-eyed. The lynx. They had come back. For a moment, the world stood still. Wolf and man and lynx caught in the moonlight like statues carved from ice. Then the wolf lunged. Eli barely raised his. rifle before the lynx struck. They moved as one, 9 silver streaks exploding from the dark. They hit the wolf from every side, claws flashing, teeth sinking, snarls ripping the night. The wolf howled, twisting, snapping, but they were faster everywhere at once. Wild fury made flesh. Snow flew. Blood flashed black in the moonlight. The air filled with screams. Eli froze, breath locked in his chest. Then, just as fast, it was over. The wolf tore free, bleeding, limping, and fled, howling into the trees. Its cries faded until the forest swallowed it whole. Silence returned, not the dead silence from before, but a living one. A silence filled with beating hearts. The lynx stood in a circle, panting, glowing in the moonlight like wild gods. The smallest female stepped forward, fur bristling, and looked at Eli. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then she bowed her head, just slightly, and turned away. The others followed, melting back into the forest like smoke. Eli lowered his rifle slowly, hands shaking, heart burning. They had come back, not because they needed him, but because he had made them strong enough to choose. He stayed there long after they vanished, staring at the place where the trees had swallowed them. The snow glittering like starlight under his boots. They weren't his anymore. They never had been, but for a brief, impossible moment, they had been his family. The next morning, the world was new. Sunlight poured over the ridges, melting the last of the winter ice. Birds sang again. The air tasted alive. Eli packed his gear, shouldered his rifle, and stepped off his porch into the endless white-green wild. The silence followed him, but it no longer felt empty, because somewhere out there 9 wild hearts were beating, and he could almost hear them running like silver fire through the trees. And that is how a lonely trapper saved 9 orphaned lynx kittens, gave them back their wild hearts, and watched them vanish into the forest like living ghosts. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like this video, share it with someone who loves animals, and subscribe for more unforgettable true wildlife stories. It helps us keep telling these rare, powerful tales of life loss and second chances. If you were Eli, would you have been able to let them go? Or would you have kept them, even if it meant they'd never be wild again? Tell us what your heart says in the comments. We read every single one.